Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. We're going to start in a moment, so please do take your seats for the beginning of this event.
I just want to start by thanking you all for coming to our 10th anniversary reception. 10 years is a brilliant opportunity for us to reflect on LCID's achievements, but also to look at the challenges we face in the years ahead as internationalism comes under increasing threats. For those of you who don't know, I'm Marn and I'm the chair of LCID. And LCID was founded on the idea that poverty is political, that we have an obligation to those beyond our borders. In the words of the poet John Donne, no man is an island entire of itself. Any man's death diminishes me because I'm involved in mankind. We have an excellent lineup of speakers for you here today, and we hope you are inspired and re-energized about the power and the capacity of politics to achieve positive things in the world. And now I want to introduce LCID's founder, David Taylor, who set up LCID 10 years ago and who has remained a driving force in the organisation throughout that time. Thanks.
That's very kind, very kind. And I'm afraid you're going to be seeing a lot of Marn and myself because we're your co-hosts for today. So look, thank you. I'm just completely overwhelmed by the turnout. You know, given current events, we weren't quite sure whether this event would even happen. Well, that's a very good point, Gordon. I mean, we have just such a phenomenal range of speakers here today, but I just want to say a quick couple of reflections from LCID's perspective. When we were set up 10 years ago, our focus was on promoting the record of the then Labour government on international development. And what a record it was. Trebling aid, making DFID independent, cancelling debt, the Climate Change Act, instigating the Arms Trade Treaty. Millions of people around the world today are better off because of the actions of that government. And Gordon, I'm going to embarrass you here a little bit because, you know, it is just such an honour to have you here with us today. I've never met someone more committed to helping other people than Gordon. And the leadership that he showed as Prime Minister and that Tony Blair showed as Prime Minister at summit after summit was truly incredible. And so too was the leadership of our Secretary of State, Douglas Alexander, who helped in when we were setting up LCID, Hilary Benn, who's here to speak to us today, Val Amos, Claire Short, and fantastic ministers like the sheer force of nature that is Glenys Kinnock. Of people like Gareth Thomas, who's been a brilliant Secretary and Minister of State. Is he here today? Oh, thank you. He certainly has. Of the former First Minister of Scotland, Jack McConnell. And advisors too, people like Stephen Doughty, now of course one of our hardest working MPs. Of people like Kirsty McNeil and Richard Darlington, who are now leading the aid sector's defence of aid. And of course, everyone else in this room who was part of the Make Poverty History campaign and campaigns like it, whether or not you worked on those campaigns, or like me, you were an activist, going on marches, signing petitions, or even just wearing one of these white bands. Today is as much a celebration of everything you achieved as it is anything LCID has done. Just on LCID, there's two quick things I want to reflect on. One is that we're particularly proud of is one is the 0.7 bill to enshrine the 0.7% target in law. Now, that had the support of MPs from across the political spectrum, and they all deserve an enormous amount of credit. But more Labour MPs voted for that bill than all the other parties combined. And it would not have passed were it not for the amazing get-out-the-vote operation that Alison McGovern was running out of her office for the key vote. And I'm very, very proud that LCID members are in that room with her, hitting the phones and encouraging MPs to be there and vote. The second thing to reflect on is our campaign on protecting civilians in conflict, and I am very proud that we are continuing to take up this issue. It's not, let's be honest, it's not necessarily the most popular issue to be campaigning on in the current Labour Party, but it is an issue that we care about a lot, and it is an important part of the legacy of the late, great and dearly missed Joe Cox MP. And I am very, very proud that we have representatives from Syrian civil society here in the room today. I am sorry that as a Labour movement over the last 8 years we have not been there for you when we should have been, but I am proud at least that this small part of it is working in solidarity with you, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you.
Finally, I just want to say again, thank you so much for coming. You do not need me to tell you that our internationalist values are under siege like never before, and defending them is going to be the fight of our lives. But I hope you come away from today, having listened to our fantastic speakers, re-energised, motivated and inspired for the struggle ahead. Thank you very much.
And now I'd just like to introduce Theo Clark, who is the Chief Executive of the Coalition for Global Prosperity, who are our co-hosts for this event today. Theo.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us on what is not a quiet day in Westminster. So thank you also to all the MPs for popping in. I'm the CEO of the Coalition for Global Prosperity, and we're thrilled to co-host today's event with LCID to celebrate your 10-year anniversary and to have Gordon Brown with us today. We founded the Coalition 2 years ago as we believe that Britain must and should continue to be a force for good in the world, and that smart and effective aid, leveraging British expertise, can and does transform lives around the world. This has been proven time and time again. In the last 3 years, UK aid has ensured that 11.4 million children have gained a decent education. UK aid has ensured the immunisation of approximately 37.4 million children. We've helped provide 40.3 million with access to clean water and better sanitation. And these are staggering achievements of which we should be truly proud, and the public is also proud. So why do we do this? Why does Britain care? Because it's the right thing to do, and that's why 30 million of us volunteer every month. It's why in emergencies and conflicts we find British volunteers risking their lives on the front line. And I saw this firsthand when I visited the world's largest refugee camp, Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, at the height of the Rohingya crisis. And I met with refugees who'd arrived on the border, exhausted, traumatised, and only carrying the food on their backs, in urgent need of shelter, medical care, and water. And it was here that I saw UK aid and our British emergency medical workers stepping in. And it made me extremely proud to be British to see that response. So for me, UK aid sends a very clear message about British values and our role in the world. Our leadership is important. We should not neglect our duty to protect the world's poorest people and also give opportunities to save and transform lives. I've seen for myself the life-saving work we carried out in Sierra Leone, preventing Ebola from reaching our shores. UK aid is also making us prosperous through investing in jobs and people in emerging economies to help create our future trading partners. And I believe that great nations boldly champion their values, particularly in challenging times. So thank you to all of you in this room for your work on helping to tackle global poverty. And I know so many of you are working on this every day. And we are thrilled to have such a fantastic lineup of speakers, all of you calling for Britain to remain a global leader in international development. So thank you to LCID, and I'd love to hand back to David and Man. Thank you.
Thank you, Theo. CGP have been absolutely phenomenal in organising this event, so thank you very much. Our next speaker, it's sort of with a hint of sadness really, because this next speaker is going to be standing down at the next election, but he has been the most fantastic, amazing, dogged, diligent chair of the International Development Select Committee, and I'm delighted to welcome to the stage Stephen Twigg MP.
David, thank you very much indeed for that very generous introduction. I'm certainly standing down from Parliament, but not standing down from the great cause of international development. And it's a pleasure to speak after Theo and to praise the amazing work which the Coalition for Global Prosperity does. Let me echo what both Man and David said at the beginning of today's session. We are here to celebrate. Yes, as he said, to celebrate the great achievements under Gordon and Tony through those years of Labour government, to celebrate this decade of work by LCID and the campaign, but also, crucially, I think, to prepare ourselves for the battles ahead, because we cannot take our position here for granted. We know there are voices both in politics and the media that want to abandon point 7. There are those that want to dilute point 7, and there are those that want to abolish the Department for International Development. It is vitally important that the Labour voice is heard loud and clear in standing up for our internationalism, as David said, but also more broadly standing up for the centrality of the global goals, the sustainable development goals, and above all else, seeking to reduce and eliminate poverty around the world. That is why the Labour government established DFID, that is why LCID exists, and that is the task that all of us must work together to defend and protect and take forward over this crucial next period. So congratulations to LCID for everything that you've done. I apologise, I have to go to something else, so I'll miss Gordon, but I just want to say to Gordon, it has been an enormous pleasure working with you in my role as chair of the International Development Committee, and if I can say in particular, the leadership that you're showing on global education and recognising the needs of children and young people around the world for education is something absolutely amazing. And I'm very, very proud of that. So thank you, Gordon, for that, and well done to LCID for the amazing work that you do.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Now, our next speaker is a great friend and supporter of LCID, Alison McGovern, and we really appreciate everything she's done, and I'd like to welcome you up.
Thank you, Man. Thank you, David. And most of all, thank you to everybody who is here today. I'm going to be very brief, not least because I've seen a huge number of friends in the room, some of whom, hello, Richard, over there, some of whom I've not seen for ages because I've been locked in the House of Commons talking about flaming Brexit. And I really want to have a catch up with people. So I'm not going to speak for very long. And also because we have the most huge list of amazing speakers come to celebrate LCID, and you want to hear from them too. But I just want to make 3 very brief points about the Labour campaign for international development and why I am so proud, even if I feel a little bit old, to have been there right from its beginning 10 years ago and now celebrating its birthday. And I want to say some thank yous, I want to say something about the politics, and I want to say something about our friend Gordon Brown. So firstly, the thank yous. LCID is the most amazing organisation because yes, it provides thought leadership on internationalism. And as David said, little could be more important right now when our values that say that it doesn't matter if you're the child of a railway worker from Merseyside or the child of a railway worker from Barcelona, Berlin, or frankly Lagos, your interests in this world are the same. Those values, friends, are under threat. So LCID provides the kind of thought leadership that we need to demonstrate the case for our internationalism for the next generation, and that is a very important thing. But even more important is the activism and the actions that LCID shows and carries out. So whether it is helping me whip the point 7 bill, and David Taylor, please don't give my secrets away. Honestly, and definitely don't tell the whip's office, or whether it is turning up in marginal seats at the time of the general election with a gang of people who are absolutely determined to see progressive MPs re-elected. I am so thankful to all the LCID activists in this room. Your action and your activism is so welcome. And I also join David in thanking our friends from the Syrian community. We know that we have not done enough. We recommit ourselves to working ever harder for the cause of Syrian civilians. Next, on the politics. LCID forms part of a very important Labour tradition and a very important progressive tradition in our country. And whilst many people will look to the last Labour government for the role that the Department for International Development, newly formed, played, I look even further back because our history on this is important. It was actually Barbara Castle, as the first cabinet-level minister for overseas development, that really changed the game in British politics when it came to international development. That moment when Harold Wilson chose to put her into the cabinet with that department and its responsibility wasn't just about changing the face of British government in this country, appointing Barbara Castle as he did to that role, but it was about taking British politics on its journey from its colonial past to its progressive, ethical foreign policy of the future. A journey that was, of course, continued by three of our great friends, TB, GB, who's here with us, and also HB, who's sat right in front of me, and Hilary. Call me a development geek, if you will. But for me, it was still a very big moment when you, in your role as International Development Secretary, set the standard for our aid in saying that it would always be unconditional, not linked to the interests of British trade, not linked to the interests of British foreign policy, but rather in pursuit of a simple goal, an end to poverty. And it was hugely important that the last Labour government did that. Of course, in Dan Carden, who's here today, we have somebody who is completing this journey and who's going to take our politics and our public policy on this issue on. And I know that he knows, as I know privately with him, that he has the best job in the shadow government and he is making the most of it. Thank you, Dan. Finally, on Gordon. Now, I was once in America and with Gordon, and the Americans were really confused because they kept referring to the Prime Minister. And it was at a point when David Cameron was the Prime Minister, and I was like, what are you talking about? The Prime Minister's not here. And they were saying, no, the Prime Minister, because Americans always refer to the President as the President. And so they said to me, so what do we call him? And I said, well, Gordon. And they couldn't cope with that. They were like, no, that can't happen. So we settled on Mr. Brown. Anyway, the truth about our friend Gordon is that he is a man who always finds the time. And when I was Gordon's PPS some time ago, when I was first elected 9 years ago, I had dreams that one day I might write a book. And Gordon's a man who's written one or two or several or actually many books. And so you probably don't remember this, but I said to Gordon, I'm really busy. I'm not like an MP. I've got a marginal seat. I've got loads of things to do, but I really want to write a book. How should I go about it? And Gordon said to me without missing a beat, get up earlier. And he is a man that always finds the time, whether it was as Chancellor dealing with massive issues of global finance, finding that moment at those finance ministers' meetings to raise the issue of debt for heavily indebted poor countries. Finding the time was absolutely crucial. And whether it was as Prime Minister during what seemed then to be the most turbulent time in British politics in living memory, but now is not, still finding the time to put global development and a subject that was then unfashionable but is now on vogue, the education of girls, on the table. Gordon has just always found the time. So all my many thanks, and I thank all of our good friends and colleagues who are here today who do so much for international development. Friends, I would like you to join me in thanking our friend who has always found the time for international development, Gordon Brown.
Can I, first of all, because he's just leaving, pay tribute to Stephen Twigg, an amazing chairman of the International Development Committee, still about to be involved in future in international development, already setting up a group of parliamentarians around the world to promote international development. Stephen has done a fantastic job. Thank you, Stephen. We all owe you a huge debt of gratitude. And thank you, Ali. Just been reselected as the candidate for Wirral, and the next as well as the existing MP for Wirral. There are so many people here who have contributed to the development of our world over these last few years. So many people from civil society, from NGOs, so many people from other countries. I praise and welcome our Syrian friends here, and we should be doing more to help you, and we will, if there's a Labour government, do more to help you. And so many MPs and ministers unfairly excluded from the House of Commons now. And if you want to meet, you can meet here and make the decisions for the future. When I think back to the formation of the Labour campaign for international development, let me thank Man and let me thank David for the tremendous work they've done over these years. We were not just defending a party. We were not just defending an institution, brilliant as DFID was. We were not just defending one policy. We were defending and advancing a cause, the cause of equality and justice and freedom and fairness in every part of the world. And what was achieved in these 10 years, and 13 years of a Labour government, and has continued to be achieved in many ways since, with debt relief, with doubling of aid to Africa, with meeting the 0.7 target, with the untying of aid that Hillary was responsible for, and I thank him. What was achieved was more people were taken out of poverty than at any time in the history of the world. More children were brought into school than at any time in the history of the world. More infants were saved from death than at any point in the world. More mothers were saved from dying in childbirth than any time in the world. And these achievements are not achievements for us just to congratulate ourselves on. These are achievements that we now need to build on. And let me also say that we thought as a Labour government that yes, Britain had 3 circles of influence. You hear it all now. Europe, America, the Commonwealth. Churchill spoke about it 70 years ago. But we were trying to create more circles of influence, responsibility around the world. Influence and responsibility with the developing countries, all the developing countries, and work too in the international institutions. And this is a lesson we must remember now because of our difficulties with Europe. We need to play a bigger role in the working of the international institutions and build stronger relationships with the developing countries, whatever happens with the European question. Because the important thing is that we are able to achieve more, creating international institutions like the G20, like the International Finance Facility for Immunization, like the Global Health Fund, where we played a huge part as Britain in doing so. And let us not forget, in a world that is sinking back into nationalism, that we champion international cooperation, justice around the world, and we have got to build the international institutions of the future. And Britain must play a leading part, and we are determined that the Labour Party will be instrumental in doing so in the future. And you know, after 2010, I think that the work of the Labour campaign for international development, and people, too many to name, who are in the front row here and who are in other rows here, who fought in Parliament for it, that you managed to keep the torch alive for international development. So yes, we failed to stop austerity in health. We failed to stop austerity in the budgets for education. We failed to stop austerity in the budgets for local government, but we managed to keep the aid budget rising thanks to the work of this coalition and this campaign and everything that you have done. And that's the challenge moving forward. You know, parties will be writing the manifestos now. I don't know what to say about Boris Johnson, to be honest. They did a poll in Scotland a few days ago, and I just mentioned this, and they gave people 17 different adjectives to use about him. One was internationalist, Churchillian, leader, determined, intelligent. 32% people chose self-seeking. 37% chose untrustworthy. 55% chose buffoon. And even 30% of the Conservative voters chose the term buffoon. But what do you think of a guy? Well, look, he has difficulties with Parliament and closes it down. He has difficulty with his cabinet and shuts them up. He has difficulties with MPs and he throws them out of the party. He has difficulties with the Constitution and tries to walk all over it, and difficulty with the laws, and he's now trying to break it. We've got a rump of a sect of a once national party which is now governing this country. But the point I want to make today is these manifestos that will be drawn up in the next few weeks about the about this election we succeeded in 2010 and 2015 so that all the major parties supported 0.7%. They supported keeping the law that requires 0.7%, supported the continued untying of aid, supported our role in international development, supported the maintenance of DFID. We must now try to persuade every single political party that is standing for election to stand on 0.7, to stand on the untying of aid, to stand on the maintenance of DFID, and every one of us in this room, whether you're pro-Brexit or anti-Brexit, whether you're Labour, Conservative, Liberal, every one of us has a part to play in making this happen. We must make sure that all the work that you have done in the last few years continues into the next few years. So this is not just a celebration, and it's not just a review of the last 10 years. It is a call to arms. Make every single party manifesto one that stands up for international development and for the role of DFID in the future. You know, my hero in all this was Nelson Mandela. When I used to meet him, he used to say, representative of the British Empire. That's and I remember, and I just say this. I remember that great event he came to on his 90th birthday in London, when we had the fundraising for Mandela. He never stopped. He'd climb one mountain anti-apartheid, was climbing a second mountain, and the second mountain, of course, was to relieve the poverty that he saw everywhere, particularly amongst children in the world. And he used his 90th birthday to raise money for international development and for his charity to do so. So he sold off this letter, Mandela's Letter to a Child, written in his own handwriting, and they had it up there framed, and everybody around the world, Bill Clinton was there, all the actors from Hollywood were there, Forrest Whitaker, Will Smith had been the compere, and then they sacked him because he was so incoherent. And it was an amazing event, and they were all bidding for this, and the prices got completely out of control. 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 for this Mandela letter, 600,000, 700,000, and then there were only two people left, Elton John and Oprah Winfrey, fighting each other. And they were sitting at the same table as us with Mandela, and it goes up to 800,000 Elton, 900,000 Oprah, 1 million Elton, 1.1 Oprah. Elton pulls out, and then Oprah's told she's paying in British pounds. And then we go to this celebration. Then we go to this celebration of the pop concert. Some of you may remember it was a famous pop concert. Amy Winehouse is there, the late, great, and sadly dead Amy Winehouse. And we're at half-time in this concert, and Mandela's going to meet all the artistes. And I was the guy there having to explain who they were, which is the worst job in the world. I didn't know. Anyway, I knew Amy Winehouse. He comes up to Amy Winehouse, and Amy Winehouse he said, "You know, Mr. Mandela," he said, "my husband and you have got a great deal in common." And she said, he says, what is it? He said, "Yes, both of you have spent a long time in prison." But Mandela told me that night, in his prison cell, he had this facsimile of a painting that's in the Tate Gallery. And it's a painting called Hope by Frederick Watts, who's the famous artist of the 19th century. And it's the inspiration actually for Barack Obama's Audacity of Hope. But he had this facsimile. And this painting, you would think it was desolation because it's a young girl blinded trying to play a harp with a broken string, almost impossible. But of course the message that Mandela was conveying by saying that he had this in his prison cell, even in the most hopeless situations there must be hope. Even when things look bleak, we must fight harder. Now, we know that the rate at which we're reducing poverty in the world is decreasing, and we've got to do more. We know that there's still 260 million children not going to school. We saw yesterday that we need to spend more money to cure malaria. We know we've got to create new international institutions like the Finance Facility on Education that I'm involved in creating, and the Education Cannot Wait program that I chair for refugees and disabled people. There is so much more to do, but Mandela tells us, never stop believing. Never stop believing we can create a better world. Never stop believing that we can win in the fight for justice and equality and fairness around the world. Never stop believing that we can replace enmity between people by empathy among people. Never stop believing we can replace selfishness by solidarity. Never stop believing. That's the message we've got to convey to the whole country.
Thank you, Gordon. That's going to be a a very hard act to follow.
I'm just the warm-up figure.
Well, Gordon, you said that we can't just congratulate ourselves and we need to be doing more. And so now I'd like to introduce the Shadow Secretary of State for International Development, Dan Carden.
Thank you very much, and Gordon, yes, thanks for allowing me to follow that. And it's a hell of an act to follow, but I should say this is the second time Gordon and I have met in the last 2 weeks, because Gordon came to visit Home Baked bakery, a cooperative bakery in Anfield, just last week. And as we're starting to get to know each other a bit more, Gordon, I wanted to start by saying we've heard TB mentioned, and we've heard GB mentioned, and HB. And I might sometimes in this place be called a Corbynista. But actually, 15 years ago, in my formative years in the Labour Party as a young member, I sat through conference after conference listening to you, Gordon, talk about education in Africa and the global south. And I remember people used to say, is he making that speech again about education in Africa? And yes, Gordon was. And you used your positions of power to put that on the agenda and to drive global change and to lift people out of poverty. So Gordon, let me say to you, starting off today, you're an inspiration to me. And I give my commitment to you that the next Labour government will build on those achievements and build on that agenda that you've set out today. So thank you very much, Gordon, indeed, for that. Can I also thank LCID and congratulate them on their birthday? Because, let's be honest, there has never been such an urgent need to return to a progressive campaign for international development, because public faith in overseas aid is falling. And with a right-wing media driving a hysterical hatred of aid spending and a Tory leadership persistently using aid to seek out new opportunities for private investors, we are in real danger of aid and development losing its focus entirely. And the latest Secretary of State, the third in the short tenure that I've been in this position, has used his first weeks in the job not to visit people on the front lines of the fight against global poverty, but instead to visit Nigeria and Ethiopia to discuss what business opportunities exist for private investors, and to establish a new commission of business leaders, sending a clear signal of this government's intent. And for me personally, it is a perverse worldview that insists that the fight against poverty and inequality is won by further empowering wealthy investors. Of course, trade has the potential to bring economic empowerment to the world's poorest countries, but without addressing the rigged global economic system that is set up to concentrate wealth and power in the hands of a tiny elite, it can also do the opposite. Gordon, you led the G7 finance ministers in cancelling debt in the global south. You show how we can work in international institutions to change the system, not just rely on charity. And that's why Labour has an alternative plan. We know that poverty is political. We know that sending money abroad will never solve the problem, whilst unfair trade deals, unchecked corporate power, tax dodging, and the ongoing extraction of natural resources from the world's poorest countries continue to create it. And it's this false story of so-called development that is fueling the public distrust in aid spending. We will only ever end poverty by tackling its structural causes. And if we want the public support, then we need to show that the fight against poverty and inequality is global. It's about working in solidarity with people across borders to build an inclusive international community that can build that fairer global economy that serves the many, not the few. So last month, I went to Kenya to meet people on the front lines of the fight back against poverty, inequality, and injustice. In Dandura slum, I met residents and activists from the Fight Inequality Alliance. Try telling them that trickle-down economics works as they continue to live next to a giant rubbish dump, despite the vast sums of foreign investment going into that country. And I also met teachers and trade union leaders who were angry with aid donors supporting the privatisation of their school system. And I met farmers who struggle to compete for fair prices in an unfair global market. But most of all, what struck me being in Kenya and speaking to people there was that those people wanted exactly the same as my constituents in North Liverpool wanted. They wanted good housing, they wanted education, they wanted healthcare. And that's why our first step in government will be to establish a dedicated unit for public services within DFID. And it will work in partnership with people and governments across the world to support the development of universal high-quality health, education and water services. So let me wrap up by thanking my colleagues here today. People like Alison, like Stephen Twigg, also my neighbouring MP in Liverpool who's been a great friend and inspiration to me. And I also want to take this moment, as it's a kind of forced end of term today, to thank the Shadow Ministers Preet and Alex and Ray Collins in the Lords and our staff, Aisha, Joe and Milton. So, you know, we have a great team here supported by people who have the most incredible experience and who've actually done this job in the past. And I'm grateful for everything that you can bring to the next Labour government to support us in our ambitions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is someone who we've campaigned for a lot as LCID. Ali mentioned that earlier. We campaign for MPs in particular. We are a relatively small organisation, so we can't get everyone in the country, but we try to focus our efforts on MPs who have been brilliant champions of development in Parliament. And that's certainly true of our next speaker. She's been an outspoken champion of the people, of the Runga people and people in Gaza and the West Bank as well. Please welcome to the stage Rosanna Allen Khan. Thank you.
Hello friends, I'm so excited to be here celebrating the 10th birthday of LCID. I don't know many famous people and I've not been an MP for very long, but I have been an aid worker for at least 12 years. And I'd like to start by paying tribute to those of you in this room who don't have the same platform that I now enjoy. The people who campaign tirelessly, with whom we really cry together. Those people who give up their family lives to get on a plane to go and fight for other people's families, for other people's rights. And when people say, why are you a Labour politician? I say because Labour values are not just values that we hold dear in the UK. They are values that are worthy of worldwide exposure and campaigning for. So from the bottom of my heart to every single one of you in this room, MPs, people from the voluntary sector, people that make a cup of tea for the person who comes back from an aid mission because they feel so awful, to all of you, thank you. Thank you for all that you do, and let's just give ourselves a round of applause, please. People used to say to me, Rosanna, you're so idealistic. One person can't change the world all by themselves. I say, you're wrong. I was a bit of a belligerent child. I would say you're wrong. Because what LCID proves is that one person can go out there, find the other belligerent, like-minded individuals, get them all together in a room and celebrate 10 years of phenomenal work, 10 years of standing up for people's rights around the world. It's so interesting because having this platform now as an MP, it's great because it means I get to talk about the issues that I campaign on around the world, but it also gives me a lens through which to see how people view politicians. Recently, I've been to Bangladesh 3 times, and twice I've worked in Cox's Bazar on the camps. I've tried to cross the border into Myanmar, got myself in a bit of trouble. That's another story for another day. But having that platform, you also realise just how hard it is to call out the things that are wrong. I've come back from the West Bank and got myself in a bit of trouble there as well. And interestingly enough, though, when in Bangladesh, I met people who said, "So, have you got a lot of Bangladeshi constituents?" No. "Aha, you have a bit of an Asian half surname, you must be Bangladeshi." No. "So why are you here?" "Politicians only go where politicians can gain something for themselves." I said, "No, I'm a Labour politician. I'm a doctor, I'm a human, I'm a mother, I'm a Labour politician. I'm here because, quite frankly, what is going on is wrong. And I have colleagues in this room who fight tirelessly calling out all that is wrong. You've heard from many of them today, and you're going to be hearing from more of them later. But that is why we do what we do, people. That is why we go out there and we give of ourselves. That is why we leave our families. And when the media are coming after you, when social media and people sitting at home in their underpants want to have a pop at the fact that you've given something of your time for others, I say this. When it gets hard, ask yourself, what is your why? We all have one. I asked myself what my why is, and I'm going to share it with you. We all have different life experiences, different family setups, but I realised, so I have 2 very little girls. They're 4 and 6 now, but obviously I've been doing aid work for many years as a doctor, and I've kind of had my kids grow up while I've been doing that. My 2 little girls, they walk down the road with their little backpacks. Their whole future's ahead of them. And I know that purely because of where they're born, and because they've got a belligerent so-and-so for a mother, and the opportunities they have with our education, with our NHS, they are going to have a life, I hope, God willing, touch wood, that means they can fulfill their potential. When I walk through the Zaatari refugee camp on the border of Syria, I see 2 little girls from behind, 2 little brunettes with their backpacks. They could be my daughters. I go to Cox's Bazar. I see 2 little brunettes with no education, with their little backpacks, wanting to go to school. They could be my daughters. I go to Palestine. I see 2 little girls with their backpacks, and they could be my daughters. So find your why. Believe in your why. And never stop, not for a second, because our values, that are the reason we're in this room today, are going to mean that we can bring about the change that we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosanna. Now, our next speaker is the former First Minister of Scotland and the chair of the APPG on the SDGs. And I just want to introduce Jack and thank you for all the work you do on the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you, Man, and thank you, Man, David, everybody who's been involved in LCID these past 10 years. Not always easy years to keep the flame going. But without LCID pushing, prodding, organising, making sure that people in the Labour Party who cared about international development, internationalists like ourselves, had somewhere to come together and to provide a voice. And yes, pushing and prodding the party leadership, those in positions of responsibility, to make sure that they kept this on the agenda and didn't get complacent. Without LCID, then we would not be as strong as we are as a movement, as a party, and as a cause. And without the record of the last Labour government, yes, Tony, Gordon, Hillary, I remember Hillary coming to Scotland when we launched our international development policy controversially and devolved Scotland when we didn't have responsibility, but we had responsibilities. And Hillary came to Scotland and the media said, "Why are you allowing the the Scottish Parliament to get involved in international development. And Hillary said, I think there's more than enough work to go around. And it was true then, and it's true today. And that's why the work of LCID and the other organisations in the party who keep our international debates alive is so important. I think if we're being honest, we have a fantastic record in government. We made a huge difference at home and around the world. But perhaps in opposition we became a little bit complacent, and in recent years a little bit distracted. And we need to ensure that the cause of international development, of international justice, is up front in our Labour programme if there's an election on the way, is up front if we have a Labour government, is up front even if we're in opposition, as we make the case in Parliament and elsewhere for the causes that we care so much about. Because we face between 2020 and 2030 a decade of delivery on the SDGs, where across the world the statistics are not just moving too slowly, but are actually in some respects moving backwards. Where in climate, in food shortages, in jobs, and in health, and in education, we face monumental challenges globally, and a decade of delivery in which we have to play our part in the UK and in the Labour Party to deliver. We face the massive challenges of climate change and increasing population, particularly younger people. And these are all important, and it's important that Britain has a role internationally, and I hear a lot of talk these days about soft power and the need for us to have our influence, and it's good in our own self-interest. This is not about British self-interest. Yes, that's important. It's not about humanity and charity, although of course that is important. It is about justice. We have a legacy. We have an international responsibility as a country. We helped create many of the problems in the world, and we need to be part of the solution too. And that is our great Labour cause. It is to recognise that historical responsibility, to recognise the cause of justice that says that it is wrong that over 100,000 kids in the world die of measles every year, that over 400,000 will die of malaria, that over 1 million people in the world today will die of TB each year, or causes related to TB. It is wrong that 13 million girls in the world today will never see the inside of a primary school. And it's wrong that over 100 million girls do not complete school. These are massive causes for us as socialists and social democrats, as people who believe that the world is the place where we are active, not just the nation state. And I urge LCID to use this fantastic attendance here today, the energy in this room, the pride that we have in our record, and the belief that we have in our hearts, to use that to relaunch here today and to make sure that international development becomes one of the great causes of the next Labour government whenever it comes.
Thank you so much, Jack. Our next speaker is someone who has been an incredible friend to LCID from the very start. Back when he was at Oxfam, I think, and then as an advisor to Douglas. And I've been so proud, we all have, to watch him become the MP he is today. He has been amazing on international development issues and took real courage to take some of the positions he's taken on issues such as on Yemen. But we're very grateful that he has done that. And of course, you know, all of you in this room who are MPs are doing incredible hard work on Brexit, but I have watched in awe of the amount of work that Stephen is doing behind the scenes to try and stop a horrible no-deal Brexit. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Stephen Doughty MP.
Thank you all very much, and thank you, David. And really, I just want to pay a huge tribute to David as well, because I think people don't see all of the incredible hard work that he's put in over this last decade in the organisation, since I think we first discussed it in a room possibly in Victoria Street or something in the Labour Party headquarters. Just an inkling of an idea, and look at what it's become today. And I want to thank Theo and the work that she's doing on that cross-party basis, which is so crucial. This is something that transcends party politics, although it's absolutely the heart of Labour's DNA, and the reason why we're all here today. We can only achieve this by working across the House. And I want to thank Dan and his team, who've been so fantastic. I know that this will be at the heart of a future Labour government, and the work that he and his team are putting in, developing the new radical policies actually to tackle the challenges we face today, as well as securing the gains that we've made in the past, are so crucial. But it's an absolute honour in particular to be here with Gordon and Hilary. And I think it's very important, we're on an anniversary, that we actually look back at some of those gains and some of those successes and how they came about. And it was the thought leadership and the ideas and the moral commitment that was there at the heart of the Labour Party coming in 1997 that led to many of the changes we were able to make. But it also takes personal leadership and graft. And I think in Gordon and in Hilary and Douglas, who I was privileged to work for, and Jack and so many others, you've seen that in spades. And Gordon, I think people don't often realise just how much work you put in. I mean, not only are you one of the most inspiring moral leaders I've ever heard speaking on this issue, genuinely, but I'll give you 3 examples. When I was lobbying at the time for Oxfam, and Gordon may not remember this, but we sat actually in Downing Street, and I was with the heads of all the different development organisations, and Gordon was due to go to Cabinet. And we sat there in a very, very deep and intense conversation about, I think it was about education and global education. And Gordon kept being interrupted by the private secretary saying, "Prime Minister, you must come down to Cabinet." And Gordon was like, no, this is important. I'm staying here discussing this issue. Secondly, it's been mentioned already, but it's the phone calls, it's the crucial interventions, it's the all the incredible work that goes in behind the scenes. And his advice to Ali is absolutely apt. I remember seeing an email that came from Gordon, I think it was at about 3 o'clock in the morning, on the crucial issue of Yemen. And Gordon was saying, and I don't think I'm breaching any confidences, how deeply concerned he was about not only the situation of poverty and inequality in Yemen, but also how that might lead to the conditions that would lead to terrible conflict and breaking apart. And it was that, that foresight, and sadly, we failed as an international community to do what we could do. We've done brilliant work as DFID in Yemen under both the Labour government, and I have to praise DFID for the work they've done in recent years, but we've collectively let down places like Yemen and Syria and so many other places, and that interlink between poverty and conflict and dehumanising of people around the world is something that we all have to pay serious attention to. And it was also about taking the calls at the crucial moment. Again, a little known story, I think, would be the role that both Hilary and Gordon played, the international ban on cluster munitions, which are the most hideous weapons of war that should not be being used, that simply target civilians, particularly young children, people working in the fields, horrific weapons. And a crucial moment at a crucial summit, it was Gordon who took a call and took a decision that led the UK to cast a vote that led to a global agreement on that. And we sadly see a number of countries still using them, but we could be in a much worse situation if it wasn't for the leadership and the crucial intervention that Gordon made at that time. So, acting on these issues requires not only the moral leadership, the thought leadership, the investment, the 0.7% commitment, but it requires hard graft. It requires the phone calls, it requires the summits, it requires the meetings, it requires the relationships with the development community, it requires the relationships with incredible diplomats and civil servants around the world, and building partnerships across countries, which sadly we seem to be losing sight of at this present time. So I think that work that we did, that incredible work we did, the life-saving work we did, should be an inspiration to us today, because it shows us that things can be different. They have been different, and they no doubt will be different under a Labour government in the future. I think it's also really crucial that we're here today, of all days, after the events we've seen in the last 24 hours, the shutting down of our parliament and our democracy, because we are still here talking about issues that matter. And it's great sadness to me, and I read these out in the chamber yesterday, that as a result of the prorogation of parliament, we lost the chance to have debates on refugees, on climate change, on sexual violence, on children, on so many other issues. We're all very, very focused on Brexit in here, but those are also the crucial issues, because while we argue back and forth about Brexit and wherever direction that takes us, it is still the case that the young people dying every day from hunger, in conflict, new people being infected with HIV, TB, malaria, causes that are very close to my own heart, people facing sexual violence, people being forced from their homes, people being unable to fulfil their full opportunity and their potential in their education or their lives. And that is going to go on every single day, whether this parliament is suspended or not. And we need to be coming to all the locations around the world where we can take and influence these decisions and doing our bit to turn things around. But crucially for me, and I'll end here, this is a fundamental issue for me. We all of us in this room, I think, see a fundamental moral duty on this issue, a fundamental moral duty. And I don't think, I think that is enough for many of us in this room to be working on these issues. That is enough, that is sufficient. But it isn't sufficient for everyone out there, and it's not an automatic given that people will then take the decisions to commit to the 0.7% target or the global goals or action on violence against women. But we need to understand as a country, as Britain, that this is in our common interest. This is in our interest, it's in the interest of the countries, the partners, the fellow humans that we share this planet with. It's in our common interest, and that's why we have to act. Jo Cox, our dear departed friend, she said very, very clearly we have more in common than what divides us, and that must be what drives British foreign policy, development policy, and our international policy going forward. I am absolutely sure that's going to be at the heart of a future Labour government, but we have the fight of our lives ahead of us, so let's get to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Now, our next speaker was the Secretary of State for International Development from 2003 to 2007. Since 2016, he's been chair of the Brexit Select Committee, and as I'm sure you are all aware, he's been doing amazing work trying to bring some order to the chaos here. Hilary Benn.
Well, Man, David, Theo, friends, thank you all very much indeed for being here today. It's a great pleasure to talk about something other than the subject we've been debating for quite some time. It's an absolute privilege to be here with Gordon. I remember an event here in the House of Commons, and I was sitting next to a development minister from another European country, and Gordon got up and spoke with the passion and eloquence and commitment and moral courage and leadership that we have seen displayed again here today. And when he sat down, the minister leaned over to me and simply said, "Blimey, I wish our finance minister had that passion and conviction when it came to the fight for international development." And I want to say to you, Gordon, and also to Tony, who is not in the room, my job, in one sense, was really quite easy because I had a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who were absolutely committed to use the office to help change the world for the better. And as you know, we had a very straightforward relationship. You gave me the money and you made one or two suggestions about how DFID might spend it. And that is roughly how it worked. And I have no complaints from me at all. One of your brilliant ideas was you were addressing the question of children dying needlessly of diseases that can be prevented by vaccination. And you came up with this idea that we should front load investment in vaccinations. And I was sent to speak to a group of city types somewhere. And you know, you go to an event and you look at the audience, you realise there isn't, in development you'd sometimes get a warm glow and sometimes a bit of hostility for policy reasons, but this was a group of people who were thinking, is this an investment worth making? There was a calculation going on in their minds, and I thought, blimey, how am I going to persuade them? So I got up and I said, look, the reason why you should invest in this is really very simple. It is to make sure that other people's children do not die of diseases that our children do not die of, because we have a health service and we have been through our own process of development. And the one thing I want to say is this, that the world faces a very simple but important choice. Now, when I was born, the global population was just under 3 billion. By the time my 3 grandsons reach my age, they will be living on a planet with 10 billion neighbours. And the truth we have to acknowledge is that in this age, in this century, our neighbours are not just the people we see in our street when we leave home in the morning or greet on our way back. They are people who live on the other side of the world, whose faces we have never seen, whose names we do not know, but to whom we are bound by our interdependence as human beings. And there's been a lot of coverage recently, obviously because of the anniversary of the Apollo landings. But for me, as a child growing up, the moment when, for all of us, we came to realise the nature of that interdependence was when, for the first time in human history, we saw the Earth from a different vantage point. in all its green and white and blue beauty, that photograph taken out of the Apollo capsule as the Earth rose above the surface of the moon. And when the world saw that, did we not understand that we've got one planet? We have the challenge of climate change, of living in a way that is sustainable, and we're either going to deal with this together or we will not succeed. And therefore, we must embrace our interdependence as human beings. And the reason why the Labour Campaign for International Development came into being, and I applaud you for all the work that you have done, is that there is no other choice but to say we have a responsibility one to another. And we live in an age where there are politicians and there are movements and there are forces who say, no, now is the time to shut the curtain and close the doors on the rest of the world because we're just going to look after ourselves. That is not the moral thing to do. It's also not the sensible thing to do. Because events, as we know only too well in other parts of the world, will affect us who live in this country. Every time I do my constituency surgery, I meet people who have come to seek shelter in Britain because of conflict and persecution in the land in which they were born. And every human being should have the right to grow up safe and secure in the land in which they were born, to raise a family, to have a decent income, a home, decent healthcare, education, prosperity, being looked after in old age. Those are universal human rights. And the other reason why this is so important, because it is about the choice between despair and hope. And we represent hope for a better future. And there is no greater proof of that than if we just pause for a moment and reflect on our own society and go back 200 years and think what life was like for people in this country. Very few people went to school. There was a great deal of crushing, grinding, poverty, inequality, unfairness, discrimination. And if our forebears and our ancestors were to walk back into the House of Commons today and look around this place, to look around our country and see what we have achieved by a process of development, they would be astonished by what we have done. And that is, for me, the single most important thing that gives us hope and encouragement, because it shows that if you have the right values and the right leadership and the right politics and the right belief and the right determination, we can make astonishing change for the better in our society. And in the end, development in other countries is not about us turning up as a nice former colonial power to say, we've come to help you develop. It is about people improving their own lives for the better with our assistance. And this is a great cause for the Labour Party and the Labour movement. Long may it continue. And I look forward, Dan, to the day when you stand up for the first time in the House of Commons as the Secretary of State for International Development, because you will be carrying with you, as you rise to your feet, this extraordinary tradition, this wonderful record, not because we're complacent, we're not, but when we think of what we have done, it makes us realise we can do so much more. Keep it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, Gordon has to leave us today. So please join us in giving us a final round of applause to Gordon. So thank you for coming. Great. Thank you so much, Hilary. Our next speaker is someone who is doing really innovative things in her community to try and engage constituents on development. As we've alluded to in other speeches, we cannot win the development battle alone with people just in this room. We have to reach out and bring the public with us. And I know that Preet's been doing fantastic stuff, in particular with the Coalition for Global Prosperity. She's also a Shadow Minister. Please welcome to the stage Preet Gill.
Thank you, and it's a real pleasure to be here today to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the Labour campaign for international development and to see such a huge degree of support for it. And we've got to thank Gordon for his leadership in respect of international development, and certainly the work he does with education cannot wait. This is a global fund that is providing, trying to transform delivery of education in emergencies, which is very much needed. Last year, I was lucky enough to visit Uganda, where I met a number of child refugees from South Sudan. And those children told me that they just have one ask of us, and that is, don't forget us. And that's why I'm proud to be a member of the Labour Party, which set up a dedicated department for international development in 1997 to tackle global poverty and ensure no one was forgotten. And I'm proud to build on that legacy as a minister in a Labour team that has a clear vision of a world where the most vulnerable and marginalised are not only not forgotten, but are placed front and centre of our work. And I'm proud that we have set out a programme to tackle the root causes of poverty, inequality and climate change and pursue a progressive globalist world built on the principles of social justice. The brief is, as I'm sure most of you know, huge. So I just wanted to briefly touch on one area that we are working on at the moment, and that is of building a truly feminist approach to international development. The struggle for gender equality is not going far enough or fast enough. And while a lot of the current rhetoric rests on empowering individual women or tackling symptoms, I am impatient in wanting to tackle the systemic causes of gender inequality, to transform gender norms, and to challenge entrenched patriarchy. And this requires joined-up thinking and the end to the siloing of gender. Gender analysis must be mainstreamed through all the work that DFID does, and we evidenced our commitment to that in the policy formation and the proposals Dan announced earlier this year concerning universal public services. With the general election looking like it will come sooner rather than later, I am excited to win and begin putting our policies into practice. But as we wait for that election, we cannot afford to relax in our fight to defend the existence of an independent DFID. And the Tories have long been attempting to repurpose, reallocate and redefine aid. And they have diverted money away from the world's most vulnerable to plug budget gaps in other departments caused by 9 years of austerity. And we shouldn't be afraid of pointing this out, nor of raising the implications of this to people across the world. So on that note, I want to finish by saying a huge thank you to all current and former members of LCID. Joe, my researcher here in Parliament, who is also involved with LCID, regularly describes the huge amount of work the Executive Committee puts in to keeping LCID going and to advocate for international development within the Labour Party and beyond. So a big thank you to all of them, and now more than ever, that need to advocate is vital. Thank you.